Okay, we're getting started. Today we're going to be talking about something that relates to Siman Tzadi Dalet and Aleph, about Cham transferring and traveling from place to place. And it starts with Maharam Matz. The din is, the pasuk says that a korban pesach needs to be roasted over a fire, and you can't even have it cooked in a pan that itself is over the fire. That's already considered not sli eish. So the Gemara says, because of that, as a result of that, you can't roast the korban pesach on a metal spit. That is to say, is that in a metal spit, the metal gets very hot from the fire. Now the truth is that the part that's near the animal, the part that's inside the carcass, is shielded. The animal carcass itself blocks the fire from getting to that. But the Gemara says is Cham, miktzaso, Cham, kulo, since part of the metal spit is exposed to the fire, that the part of the spit that's inside the animal also gets hot, and therefore part of the animal is being cooked, is being roasted by the heat of the metal as opposed to directly from the heat of the fire, and therefore the animal, you're not allowed to roast the korban pesach like that with a metal spit. And because of this rule called Cham, miktzaso, Cham, kulo, if part of it is hot, then the whole thing is hot. Here for a piece of metal, that the part of the spit is hot, then the whole spit is going to be hot, and there's going to be it'll be cooking the korban pesach from the inside. That's what the Gemara says, and that's accepted. That's what the din is for korban pesach. Now that's for korban pesach. That's where the Gemara uses the term Cham, miktzaso, Cham, kulo. Now we switch to our kind of a din about Cham transferring from place to place. So the general rule is that Cham only transfers when things are yatzal display. Right? They have to be, the normal way things transfer is through heat. So things need to be yatzal display. So now as a machlokes rishonim, does this din of Cham, miktzaso, Cham, kulo work for our din of Blios transferring with yatzal display also? Which is to say is Cham, miktzaso, Cham, kulo says that it's considered that it's hot, but is that also, so to speak, hot enough that Cham could transfer also? In the korban pesach, nothing had to transfer. It was just a matter of cooking the korban pesach, that there was heat causing the korban to be cooked. So some Rishonim say that it's the same thing. Once it gets hot, then Cham could transfer also. And that's the second day that the Maharam brings over here. That says that yes, there's a problem if what the case in the Shulchan is, we'll get the case in a second. That's the second day of the Maharam says that there is a problem of Cham, miktzaso, even for the transfer of Cham also. Okay, but the first day of the Maharam, to have somebody live, the first day, aside from the people logging in, but the first day of the Maharam says, if you sit there anyhow, it's easier for me because of the camera. The first day of the Maharam, and what the Ramaz is passing like is that Cham, miktzaso does not work. We do not have to be choshesh for Cham, miktzaso, Cham, kulo with Indian transfer of Cham. So for korban pesach we choshesh, but not for Indian transfer of Cham. Okay, so what's the case that the Maharam brings in this? The case the Maharam brings is like this: a person has a spoon, or in my case I put it a ladle inside of a pot. Okay, so the ladle can be divided into three parts. Okay, the ladle, as far as Cham, the pot is hot, and the ladle. So the part that I marked number 1, that's the part of the ladle that's inside the pot. That's obviously Cham transfers from there. So it's a pot of meat, and it's a milchigas ladle. So Cham, of course, is transferring there, and the Cham is transferring back and forth, and potentially making possible. But then there's two other parts to the ladle. Okay, there's the part of the ladle that's inside the over on top of in the pot. That's why I labeled number 2, the yellow one. Correct, above the lid. It's all, but that's above the pot. And then there's 3, which is outside the pot. It's out of the whole range of the pot over here. So the Chovush says that section number 2, the part that's above the pot, is not even part of our shaila. That's for sure considered hot because the vapors coming out, the hot steam coming out, the zeh coming out of the pot heats that part up. So what's in section number 2, the part of the ladle that's above the pot is for sure hot. It's physically hot. And therefore, since it's physically hot, it's not part of our shaila of Cham, miktzaso. The shaila we have, the shaila is, what about the section, what we call section number 3, the part that's outside of the pot, which would be in the person's hand, is that part also considered to be hal inyan tam transferring or not? Okay, and for that, the Maharam has two days, and the Maharam's ikar day, and the Ramah says we pass it, is we do not say that the ham transfers, even though we do not say cham miktzaso cham kulo for this din, and therefore into section number 3 there is no. And therefore time does not transfer into section number 3. Time does not transfer from that section number 3 into the pot of food that's being cooked. Okay, well, in our Cheshbon Bitul, I'll read you the words. So what we count is we want to decide is the amount of milchig tam coming out of this spoon bottle into the pot. So we say no, parts of section 1 and 2 have to be bottle b'shishim. The part of the metal in section number 3, the Blios from section number 3, do not have to be bottle. We don't have to worry about those. So we only have to calculate whether from section 1 and 2 are bottle, but not from section 3. Okay. So that's what our din says over here. So the Pri Megadim and many others ask that l'chori there's a steer to this thing. Okay, this our case was in sitting outside out. For those watching on the screen, you can't see it outside out on the bottom. Okay, but this our case is the spoon. He says this, but if you look, there are 2 dinim in Siman Tzadi Beis where it seems to say that we do say that cham miktzaso cham kulo causes tam to transfer, and they are like this. First case is you have a pot of food cooking, and there's a piece of meat that's sticking out of the liquid. Okay, in my picture, it's even sticking out of the pot, but that's not relevant. The point is that there's a piece of meat that's sticking out of the liquid. Okay.
I mean, you think it's a piece of meat?
It's a piece of chicken. It's supposed to be a piece of chicken. That's what it's supposed to look like, a drumstick. Okay. So it's a piece of meat is sticking out of the pot. It's sticking out of everything else, and some milk falls onto the part that's sticking out. Okay. It didn't fall into the pot. It fell on the outside. And the din is that when you want to decide if the milk is bottle b'shishim into the pot, you count everything that's in the pot. Which is to say is the milk, we don't say the milk is only falling into this piece that's out of the pot. We say the milk fell into the whole pot altogether. It fell into the whole thing. We have the whole thing that's considered it fell into. Okay, that's one case. Okay, so there we're sort of saying, now that I'm thinking about it, that's not like the Pri Chodesh actually. Because the Pri Chodesh says that's not even a shaila of cham miktzaso. Interesting. Okay, so let's go to the second case. We'll say here. The second case was, you have a pot, again, a fleshig pot of cooking. This is the din of tipas cholav. The din is that the milk spilled onto the side of the pot. Okay, it spritz onto the outside of the pot, and it spritz into the part where the food is cooking. Okay, so in this pot, it looks like 3/4 of the way up, food is cooking, and the top quarter, let's say, has no food in it, and something spritz into the part adjacent to where the food is cooking. It's on the outside, but it spritz onto that part. So the din is, again, you want a cheshbon, is the milk bottle or not bottle into the meat that was in the pot. You can count not only the places where the food is, but even the higher parts of the pot. The upper parts of the pot are also counted towards the cheshbon, which is to say is that we're assuming the time is spreading. Time is spreading to the whole pot. Okay? Actually, as I'm saying this, I'm realizing that all of this is not like the Pri Chodesh, who said those parts are not even in the shaila. Okay, so this is the Pri Megadim and many others ask this kasha, and they say is, how come in these cases, in these 2 cases on the right, we say that I'm going to finish my thing. In the 2 cases on the right, in the 2 cases in Tzadi Beis, we say that time does transfer. And the case on the left, in Siman Tzadi Daled, in our case, we say time does not transfer.
You're saying Pri Chodesh said that
the Pri Chodesh said
the area above the spoon of the pot would also be included.
That's not even in the shaila of
it's only where it's outside of the...
Right. The parts that are within the framework of the pot, all those don't even count. They're not part of the shaila. It's pasha that's not cham miktzaso. That they're physically cham, right? And that doesn't even count. So he said that's not, so not like that. Okay. And many people ask this shaila. So I'm saying as I'm talking this, I'm realizing that it's not like what the Pri Chodesh says. Okay.
Clearly, the people asking the shaila would include the area of the spoon that is the handle that even though it's above the area of the pot.
Right. Correct. Okay. I'm realizing that's what I'm saying this. Okay. So this the Pri Megadim tells us the 2 answers: a Magen Avraham and a Shach who answer this kasha. Okay. The Magen Avraham says the difference between the cases is excuse me. The difference between the cases is, are we trying to figure out if time is spreading? We have the part that's physically hot, and we have the part that's only hot because of the din said so, because Cham miktzaso Cham kulo.
Right.
So in the Magen Avraham says, when the tam is going from the Cham miktzaso X section into the other part, like in our ladle, it's going from the part, this is a milchig spoon, the part of the spoon that's out of the pot is milchig. Tam going to go from the milchig into the pot. Has to go into the pot. So that's when we have a question of Cham miktzaso Cham kulo. But in the case, did I say that backwards?
Sounds good to me.
Yes, but I think I'm saying this backwards. Okay, I'm not sure what I'm saying up here. Over here, the tam is transferring out of the spoon. Okay, I'm confused about this. Okay, I'm confused because all the cases, the tam is going from here. Okay, I confused myself. Okay.
Well, but those two cases, but this is going to be miyashav why those two cases are not like the third case.
Yes.
So in those two cases, we're trying to say that the milchix is you're saying in that case also it's falling on an area that's
It's from it's spreading
the cool place to where it's warmer.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm confused. Okay. Anyhow, we're going to skip the Shach because I'm not sure what I'm saying over here. And the Shach. Anyhow, good news for the Jews is that the Pri Megadim says we're going to follow the Shach. So at least I'm going to tell you what the Shach says, and then you'll understand it. Okay. So now the Shach. Now that I'm talking more, I'm even realizing I'm answering my other question, which is the Shach. Essentially is going to say the same thing that the Pri Megadim said beforehand. Now that we think about it, you'll hear what he says. The Shach says this, and Rabbi Kovush says it's so posh. This is obvious that this is the right answer. The Shach says like this. He says. He said, Cham miktzaso, and it makes no difference whether it's going in or out. It's all the same thing. It makes no difference. He said the difference is that in the case in our tzadi daled of our spoon that went in, or the case on the left, the spoon is cold. So the reason to think about whether tam is transferring or not transferring is only because of Cham miktzaso. The only way that tam can transfer here is because Cham miktzaso would say, yes, tam transfers into that spot. And we paskin, no, we don't say Cham miktzaso le'inyan tam transfer. But in the other two cases, over there, it's hitting a hot piece of food. Okay, in both of those cases, either it's hitting the piece of meat that's sticking out of the pot, or it's hitting the side of the pot. All these things are boiling hot. The meat, these pots are cooking over the fire. So when it hits those spots, the reason why time transfers is not because of Cham miktzaso. It's not because part is hot spreads the heat to the other spot. It's physically hot. It's physically hot. So if it's hot, of course time transfers. He says it makes no difference. Okay. Which now that as I'm saying this, I'm realizing that's really what the Pri Megadim says. The Pri Megadim says that spot is really hot. We don't. That's not in the shaila of Cham miktzaso. In fact, that's what the Pri Megadim had said. That area, that higher area, is not part of the shaila of Cham miktzaso because it's actually physically hot. And the only Cham miktzaso is in cases where it's not physically hot, where it's just hot because halachically, so to speak, we're calling it hot, but technically we're not actually saying that it's going to be hot. Okay. So now this nafkaminas of what this, we'll call it just what the Shach said, which is like this. One nafkamin is, what happens if, in the case of tzadi daled, if this milchig spoon that had been put in, instead of it being a cold spoon, you actually put a hot spoon in. Okay? So if you put a hot spoon in, then the Shach says, well, if you put in a spoon that's hot, so then of course time is going to transfer all back and forth. Okay, the din of Cham miktzaso is only when you put a cold spoon in, and then the din has to call it, so to speak, call it hot. But if you put it in a spoon that was actually hot, then yes, we say Cham miktzaso. Okay. The second thing is what happens is if you put in. I think we're going to get to understand the Magen Avraham now. What happens if you put in a cold spoon? Okay, you put in a cold spoon. So according to the Shach, there's no tam transferring from the fleshig pot into the top of the spoon. Okay, no tam transfers into over here. According to the Magen Avraham, and now I'm remembering what the Magen Avraham said. The Magen Avraham said is, tam can't go into the pot through Cham miktzaso, but tam goes into the spoon through Cham miktzaso. It goes in that direction. So in these directions, the tam is going into the food, and that it could do. Over here, the tam is going, and the tam over here also goes into the edge of the spoon. But the din was only talking about whether the tam can come out of the spoon. But tam going into the spoon, for sure it does. Okay, even though we're making about Cham miktzaso, that's to get tam out of the spoon. But to get time into the spoon, we have. So over here also time going into the food, and that we can have Cham miktzaso. So according to the Magen Avraham, this part of the spoon, the part of the spoon that's out, where we didn't say Cham miktzaso, this part is actually flation or treif. This became treif. The only thing the Shulchan Aruch just said was, but don't worry about time coming from here back into the pot, because that's not Cham miktzaso. But this part of the spoon, that edge of the part, actually gets hot. It does become treif or fleshings in this case also. Okay. So what would happen now if someone took the edge of that spoon and stuck that into another pot? This according to Magen Avraham, this top part of the spoon is treif. If that part is straight and you stick it into another pot, you just ruined your other food. Okay. But according to the Shach, no deal. According to the Shach, nothing happens. This is not part of Blios over here because Cham miktzaso doesn't let time transfer this and that part of the spoon stays kosher. Nothing happens to that part of the spoon. It was unaffected. Okay? And the Pri Megadim says that that's correct. He passes like the Shach, about that din, and says that no time transcends that food. But he throws in, Pri Megadim throws in an extra twist over here. Okay? From someone called the Maharam Matz. Okay? Maharam Matz, who the Shach is quoting, and Yam Sham also quotes as a mumcha gadol b'Torah, and when he's a big person. I've never heard of him before. But anyhow, and he says like this: even though this top of the spoon doesn't become treif, which is what the Shach says, this part of the spoon does not become treif. Time does not spread from the spoon into the top of the spoon. That's true. Nothing spreads over there. He says, but that's only true if you leave it like this. What happens if while this was cooking, a piece of meat fell onto this part of the spoon? Then it's hot enough, the time does get absorbed into there. Okay? So go figure this. I'm not sure how to wrap my head around this thing. The time does not spread from the spoon into here by itself. But it's, so to speak, hot enough that if something would fall onto it, it could be balei at that part of there also. Okay? Okay. So, I have some nafkaminas, some applications, if I could use the word this din Cham miktzaso. Okay, I'll give you some applications. Try to make it more nicer for us if I can than these kind of pots and pretty pictures. And one is for a filler, which we've been writing about on Mondays. Okay, about fillers. Okay, in a filler, the food passes through some kind of a nozzle and some kind of a section of it. But the filler itself, the filler device, is a really big machine. And it's got lots of metal all over the place. So the part where the food passes through, that if we fill food hot, then the food goes through hot, and that part where it's hot, of course, is blia. Of course, is blia in that part. What about the parts? What about the parts that are not touching the food? The parts of, let's say, the nozzle is 6 inches tall, and the food only touches the bottom quarter of an inch, but the top parts of it don't touch anything like that. Okay, so if they actually get hot during production, if during the production they're getting hot, I mean, so much is flowing through that not just a little bit on the bottom gets hot, but the whole top gets hot, then according to the Shach, there's going to be a blia. Okay, there's going to be a blia even into that top part, because the Shach says if it's actually physically hot, then blia transfers. It makes a difference if it's going in or out. Blia transfers if it's physically hot. Cham miktzaso is only when it's not physically, we're not seeing the physically heat of it. Okay.
So according to Magen Avraham, though.
According to Magen Avraham, it would also become. It would also.
Let's say you have a tray filler,
Mm-hmm.
and now you want to use it for kosher.
Right.
So according to Magen Avraham,
it wouldn't come back, right? Because it wouldn't come back in. That's correct. That's correct. Now the second is, what happens if you have a kettle that you know that you only fill the kettle up till I don't know 3/4 of the way up. Okay, it never goes above that amount. Let's imagine it doesn't go above that part. But Lamaisa is whether it goes there or it doesn't go, whether the food goes there or not. Of course, it gets hot. Of course, when you're cooking food in there, of course, it's going to get hot on the whole thing. So the Shach, and Maharam Matz also, according to the Shach, the tam spreads to that part because it is hot. So even without the din of Cham miktzaso, tam will spread into that higher part. Okay, it's really I forgot to mention this, but it's really a din of pot handles in Sim Tafnanal. You have to kasher pot handles because they're considered to get hot and tam spreads into them. Okay, and the last thing is a case, a ship hold, same kind of a case. We talked about this once a long time ago. In the ship hold, that we're going to talk in a second, I'll mention it again in a second, is the walls that are holding the product. So the hot product is in the tank, and the wall might be very thick. Does time transfer into the full thickness of that wall, or just into the edges where it's touching?
It's not like a jacketed compartment?
Correct.
It
No,
is
it is not jacketed. No, it's not jacketed.
So how do they keep it warm?
They don't. They at delivery have to be a certain temperature. The product could spend a week in the ocean, so they may keep it warm during the time by running. They have heat coils running through it,
like a steam coil,
running through the thing, and then either they keep it warm the whole time, or they just wait towards the end and they heat it up in the last couple of hours or days before they get it in. But that also we would say is would Tom transfer from the center into the thickness of the metal. If the metal is a few inches thick, well, transfer into the full. Then the Shach says is that's Cham miktzaso. It does not transfer. Tom will not transfer past the parts that are going to be hot. Only the parts that get hot. If they do get hot, then Tom does transfer. Okay, then depending on if it does or not. Okay, now all that we talked about of Tom transferring with his Cham miktzaso possibilities and heat v'chahina, that's only if it is actual heat. But there's another din, Kovush k'mevushal, that we say Kovush is like it's mevushal. But even though Kovush is like it's mevushal, it's only mevushal for the part that's actually touching. So if we have food sitting in a container or in a tanker and it's only 3/4 and it's 3/4 full and it's Kovush, it's not hot. It's just Kovush and it's just sitting there. So Tom only transfers, in most cases, only up to the section that's submerged that has the liquid touching it. But the part that's higher than that is not. Even though we would Kovush could become mevushal, you'd say maybe Tom should transfer to the higher part.
Interesting.
Okay,
you can't say kulo.
Well, why not? Because if this is like it's hot, then
what's making in other words, the logic I thought, maybe I'm wrong, is that the heat that's in part of it somehow pushes
spreads
the Tom further.
Mm-hmm.
But over here, there's no heat to propel it.
Well, but if you said like the Magen Avraham, that Tom can transfer into the thing,
but still through heat.
Through some, well, but this is kilovushal. It's like it's heat.
I'm saying Kovush is not a vehicle.
Okay, so you'd say it's Kovush is kilovushal. You might think the Kovush is like it's mevushal. Okay, but it's not. That's not the truth. It's not. It doesn't go past. Okay. Now two things that are I've said beforehand, way beforehand. I'm just going to say it really briefly. One is how far does Tom transfer? Let's say there is heat. How far can Tom transfer? I mean, let's say something's very thick or very long. How far can the Tom transfer? So we talked about this again in Hakol scale. And so the Taz says it doesn't go a merchak rav. Okay, it's a very vague term. It doesn't go very far. Okay, what does very far mean? It doesn't tell you what very far means. So Shach said he thought very far means half an inch, and that you'd be choshish for 6 inches. Merchak rav is 6 inches. After that, you don't have to be choshish for it. Okay. And that would be in a factory. Think about in a factory, if you have kettles that are connected with pipes, this kettle has a really long pipe from one to the next, or for two things that are near each other. Does Tom transfer through those pipes to the next one over? Okay. And Shach said, I'll tell you how I know this. I'll tell you right that I'm right. He said over from somebody else. That Moshe says that when you have walls of a ship, and the holds are separated by walls, and the walls are 3 feet thick, and Moshe said the Tom doesn't transfer from one hold to the next hold. And in this one we have Kashrus, in this one we have treif. Tom doesn't transfer through the whole wall. The walls are 3 feet thick. Tom doesn't transfer from one to the other. And Shach said, and the reason is because it only goes 6 inches. So the hold is 3 feet. The wall is 3 feet thick. Tom does not go through from one side to the other. Okay, that's it.
So how do you go from 6 inches to 3 feet?
No, it can only go 6 inches.
How do you only 6 inches?
That's what Shach said. He said this is his idea.
What's the raya? I don't know about the raya.
He has no raya. It's just what he said. He thinks really the ikar din would be only half of an inch.
Yeah.
But 6 inches is like how is he not?
Shach is bringing a raya.
He brings that's such a concept that the distance how far is you. I mean the Taz says merchak rav. He said Ramesh said 3 feet. It can't go through. So that's because it's too far.
2 feet in.
Yeah, that's not a right to the detail of that. Correct. But the truth is that then they asked David Feinstein. He said, no, my father didn't hold us any distance. It goes as far as it wants to. There's no different. The only thing is, he figured that if the wall is 3 feet thick, it's not going to be hot. And we've been seeing this whole time that if the wall doesn't get hot, then Shach says, no, the Tom doesn't transfer. We don't say Cham miktzaso Cham kulo. We don't say this Tom transfer just because it's hot. So it was 3 feet thick. You come on, 3 feet thick. It's not going to be hot all the way through. Right. He didn't know there's such a thing that there's a different distance. Or maybe he did, but when 3 feet, 6 inches or 3 feet are not what he's talking. What not the amount is. Maybe it's 50 feet. I don't know. Whatever. He didn't say what it is. Okay. Then.
Isn't it something you can just see if it's hot still?
If it's physically hot. Yeah. No. This point is that even if it's hot, Again, we're not saying it's hot because of Cham miktzaso. We're making about Cham miktzaso Cham kulo. Because, but is it physically? Let's say it physically is hot.
Yeah.
So would the time transfer more than 6 inches? So
I'm saying, so Moshe was talking about a case that
he said it's not getting hot.
He said didn't even come to
right. So that's to the shiloh just Cham miktzaso. Saying we're making about Cham
it would be physically hot.
Then his father would have been machmir.
And Rav Shach
He's saying no, just 6 inches. It won't go that far. Okay. Okay. Then there's also in the dinner of Tipas Chol talks about time transferring from it fell on one side of the pot, does it spread, it doesn't spread. So Rav Shach could say all those are less than 6 inches. That's not so far-fetched. But there's some cipher who said that time transfers afilu kamet tefachim. Okay, so that sounds like more than 6 inches. You know, I mean, we could talk about how much you think a tefach is, but it sounds like that's more than 6 inches. And there's others later who also give impressions that even it goes really far. Okay, how far is not so. It's a little vague. How far is far? Okay. The next thing is that there's a din which we talked about, I think last time. Of if two kelim are touching each other, it makes no difference. They could be hot. No time's going to transfer between them unless there's roitiv between them. So Rick says that if they're screwed together, two kelim are touching each other and they're screwed together, still no time is going to transfer. It's still two different kelim, and the screw that's between them doesn't make them together. But if they're welded together, then they become one kli. Okay, now it becomes like it's one kli. Okay.
And what's the difference?
Because if you're welded, now it becomes like one unit. It's like now they're fused together. It's like it's one big kli. So then if they're all
because a screw is temporary and
because a screw is just a way of holding two things together. They're not really
like a temporary thing. You're saying.
I'm focusing on the temporary. On the there's nothing. They're not when you what makes one pot into one pot anyhow?
There's another way you could take two pieces of metal. I forgot what it's called. It's a different thing which is permanent. And it's the same idea of a screw. It's just like, we took like these small sticks of metal in between them. I can't remember what it's called.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? And
no.
That's the way that you can attach two sheets of metal or two things of metal against each other.
So the point here is not that whether it's permanent or temporary. The point is that when it's screwed, it's still, so there's a cleat touching a screw, which is touching another cleat. They're not attached to each other. Let's say the metal pot, the metal pot itself, what makes it one thing? It's because you melted all the metal together and you formed it into the shape. So that's so when you weld it, you're doing the same thing. You're making it into one thing. You do
the same. I mean, I'm just saying. I don't see the logic over here. You're doing the same thing with various, like this thing that I'm describing. It has a similar, to screws, but it's fusing these pieces together.
So I'm not sure what you mean. If it actually touches, if they now became one thing, then it's one thing.
Well, it has to do with what you refer to it as.
No, is the metal all fused together? And screws are not attached to it. They're connected to each other, but they're not fused together. They're still separate pieces. There's pot, and screw. And over here, I suppose when you weld it, it becomes one big thing. Okay, listen to this side of it. Rav Schwartz said. He says it depended. He spoke to a welder, and he says it depends. The different ways to weld things. You could weld with the bonding material of the weld could be the same metal as the pots are, or the kalim are, or it could be a different metal. So he said only when it's Rav Schwartz said only if it's the same metal. Let's say they're all stainless steel. They're all the same metal. Then it becomes one big kli. But if the kalim are, let's say, stainless steel and the weld was with nickel, that wouldn't work.
Okay? So Schwartz's own fetish.
Yeah, this is his own idea after talking to a welder and said that's what makes it one kli, because now it's all one. It's just a bigger stainless steel kli. But if we have something in the middle that's some other metal, then that doesn't count. Okay, his own angle. Okay. Last thing is, how quickly does time transfer? So most people would assume that time transfers instantly. You stuck the spoon in, or the milk fell into the pot, you think it falls instantly. Okay? So Peschichu and Simon Kofei brings from Chamudi Daniel. He brings from a raya from the din of Tipas Chalav. In the din of Tipas Chalav, it talks about if a drop of milk falls in, that's these cases over here, it falls into the pot, then it depends if you were near the kisa. Did you cover the pot and stir it up or not? That has to do with whether the time transfers or doesn't transfer. It's a Hanan question. He says you see over there that it takes time for the bleed to happen because it depends. Did you stir it right away? Did you not stir it? Did you cover it or you didn't cover it? Depends on the time. You see, it's not an instant. There's a time lag. It takes a few seconds. Okay, so that's what he says. this is what he says. The Bali Shulchan says no. He says Isav Hetem Pri Megadim says no. It's instant. It's automatically. Okay, and things are automatically. He doesn't explain, but probably they're going to say that in the case of Hanan, it's different because you have to have a chaticha. So the Tei Hanan, it's a chaticha of Isser before, and then the chaticha is Nasas Nevela. And so it takes the time to make this into a chaticha of Isser, as opposed to if it got mixed in, then that things would be different. And they say, in fact, it's instant. He says, if you look, you see in the Hilchos HaGol's Kalim, we have such a concept also, which is how long does it take for Tam to come out of a Kli when you do Hagolah? Okay, and there also, Poskim say that it happens instantly. Okay, now the Mishnah Berurah there brings that there are those who say otherwise, that you should leave there for a couple of seconds because it takes time. I'm not sure if it's exactly the same thing. Because coming out might take longer than going in. You can imagine, might take longer. And maybe the Tali Zeb is that. But in Bali Shulchan brings for the Pri Megadim that no, things that Tam transfers instant. In whatever the case is, whatever we figured out today, I'll figure out what cases the Tam transfers, that happens right away. And there's no pauses.